Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. The world of Harry Potter isn't just about the walls of Hogwarts, spellcasting, or battles with the dark forces. It's also filled with magical places that the films only briefly touch upon. One such place is the village of Hogsmeade. In the books, it plays a far more important role than you might think. Today, we'll dive into curious and lesser-known facts about this enchanting village. Enjoy the video! Number 1. The Hogwarts Express stops at Hogsmeade. Contrary to popular belief, the train carrying students does not arrive directly at Hogwarts. It stops at the Hogsmeade station, a magical stop connected to the school by a long scenic road that curves around the Black Lake. First years traditionally travel to the castle by boat, while older students walk from the station. Interestingly, the Hogsmeade station only appeared in the 19th century. The Ministry of Magic decided to use trains for safer student transportation, as the journey to Hogwarts could be perilous. Number 2. The only all-wizarding village. The films never mention it, but Hogsmeade is the only village in Britain entirely inhabited by wizards. Elsewhere, magical folk live hidden among muggles, forced to conceal their powers. But in Hogsmeade, magic is a way of life. Its proximity to Hogwarts, unseeable by muggles, likely played a key role in establishing this unique status. Number 3. Founded by Hengist of Woodcroft. Hogsmeade's roots stretch deep into the medieval past. It was founded by a wizard named Hengist of Woodcroft, a Hufflepuff student who lived in the 10th century. Some believe he was a pupil of Helga Hufflepuff herself, one of the school's founders. Hengist was driven out by muggles and settled near Hogwarts, creating a haven where wizards could live freely. This origin story is likely why the village was later designated as an entirely magical settlement. Number 4. A military outpost. Hogsmeade isn't just a place for butterbeer and shopping. In 1612, it became the site of a major goblin rebellion, one of the largest in magical history. Wizards organized their command post in one of the local inns. This shows that Hogsmeade served not only as a domestic hub, but also as a strategic outpost in the magical world. Number 5. Students weren't always allowed to visit. Even though Hogsmeade lies just beside Hogwarts, students were long forbidden from visiting. It wasn't until 1714 that an edict allowed upper-year students, starting from third year, to enter the village on certain weekends, and only with written parental permission. This privilege could be revoked. Neville Longbottom lost it in The Prisoner of Azkaban for losing the passwords to Gryffindor Tower, and Harry was banned in the Order of the Phoenix when Umbridge punished him for speaking the truth to the Quibbler. Number 6. The Invisibility Hat. One of Hogsmeade's more whimsical shops is the Invisibility Hat, established back in 1750. It specialized in wizarding attire and is where Harry, Hermione and Ron stopped by in Chapter 27 of Goblet of Fire to buy Dobby a Christmas present. The scene is full of humor. They browsed the most absurd socks imaginable. One pair was embroidered with gold and silver stars, and another would scream if not washed regularly. These details bring Hogsmeade to life in a way the films often miss. Number 7. The Shrieking Shack. More than a haunted house. The Shrieking Shack was never haunted. That was just the story the villagers told themselves to sleep easier. In truth, the screams were real, but they came from a boy, not a ghost. Remus Lupin, bitten by Fenrir Greyback as a child, began attending Hogwarts in 1971. Dumbledore made it possible. He had the Whomping Willow planted. Beneath it, a tunnel led straight to the shack. "I was a very small boy," Remus later confessed to Harry, "when I received the bite." Each full moon, Remus was escorted through the tunnel. Alone, he would transform. His screams, wild, inhuman, unbearable, echoed through Hogsmeade and gave the house its cursed reputation. No one dared approach. The shack was protected by enchantments and fear. It kept the villagers out and the truth hidden. Even among Hogwarts students, only a few knew. James, Sirius, and Peter discovered the secret and became animagi to keep him company during his transformations. "They couldn't bear to leave me alone," Remus said quietly. Years later, Harry entered the shack himself in The Prisoner of Azkaban. That night it became more than just a shelter for howls. It became a place of confessions, old grudges, and almost murder. Sirius Black, Peter Pettigrew, the truth of the betrayal that destroyed Harry's family, all revealed inside those crumbling walls. The Shrieking Shack may have started as a cover, but it ended as a crucible, a place where the past bled out and secrets couldn't hide. Number 8. The Three Broomsticks and Its Secrets. The Three Broomsticks was always warm, always loud. Butterbeer steamed in mugs, firelight danced on wooden walls, and laughter echoed off the ceiling beams. Students flocked there in groups, crowding around small tables and swapping gossip. But beneath the comfort, the pub held secrets. It was here, during a quiet visit in The Prisoner of Azkaban, that Harry, hidden under his invisibility cloak, heard Cornelius Fudge, McGonagall, and Hagrid speak of Sirius Black's supposed betrayal. "Lily and James put their faith in the wrong person," McGonagall said, and the words hit like a curse. Madame Rosmerta served drinks with a smile, but she saw everything. A friend of Dumbledore, trusted by ministry officials and Hogwarts staff alike, she kept her ears open. Her connections made the pub a meeting point, not just for students, but for spies, aurors, and sometimes enemies. Years later, in The Half-Blood Prince, Draco Malfoy exploited that very trust. He cursed Rosmerta with the Imperious Curse and forced her to pass along a cursed necklace meant to kill Dumbledore. She never remembered doing it, only woke up days later, shaken and ashamed. Still the pub stood through it all, through wars and whispers, through love letters passed across tables and deadly plans spoken in shadows. The Three Broomsticks remained the heart of Hogsmeade. Cosy, yes, but like all truly magical places, never quite what it seemed. Number 9. Secret Romances at Madame Puddifoot's. Madame Puddifoot's tea shop looked like a cake exploded inside it. Pink bows floated in mid-air. Golden cherubs blew confetti kisses. Tables were cramped, covered in lace, and always just a little too close together. For Hogwarts couples, it was the go-to spot. The place where first kisses were attempted, where promises were whispered, and sometimes where hearts quietly cracked. "She's mad about that place," Ron said, shaking his head when Harry mentioned taking Cho Chang there. Harry's date with Cho was a disaster wrapped in whipped cream. Valentine's Day, every table filled with couples holding hands. Cho tried to talk about Cedric. Harry panicked and brought up Hermione. The mood sank like a lead balloon in sugar tea. "I forgot what it was like to be in love with someone dead," Cho whispered. Harry had no answer. When he left, the cherubs were still scattering confetti, but it felt like ash. Students later joked that Madame Puddifoot had enchanted the room to magnify drama. One Ravenclaw claimed the tea had amortentia in trace amounts. Others said the cherubs watched and reported back to Filch, but one thing was certain. No one came out of Puddifoot's unchanged. Love, jealousy, guilt, and truth all stewed together in porcelain cups and rose-tinted steam. Number 10. Zonko's vs. Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. Before there was Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, there was Zonko's Joke Shop. It stood right in the heart of Hogsmeade, with windows full of dung bombs, nose-biting teacups, and the infamous trick wands that turned into rubber chickens. Fred and George Weasley first visited Zonko's in their 3rd year, eyes wide, arms full of mischief. "One day," Fred whispered, "we'll have a place just like this." It wasn't just a shop. It was a training ground for pranksters, rebels, and anyone who believed laughter was a kind of magic. The twins learned more from Zonko's shelves than from most Hogwarts classes. They tested skiving snack boxes before they even invented them. The shopkeeper, a hunched man with wild grey hair, once slipped them a prototype of a self-writing howler. "It's unstable," he warned. Fred grinned. "Perfect." Zonko's wasn't just popular with the students. Filch had an entire drawer labelled "confiscated from Zonko's" in his office. But during the Second Wizarding War, Zonko's closed its doors. The windows went dark, the shelves collected dust. Hogsmeade felt a little colder. That's when Fred and George stepped up. Their shop in Diagon Alley exploded with colour and chaos, but you could still feel Zonko's heartbeat in the walls. "We owe it everything," George said once, staring into a box of canary creams. "Zonko's may have vanished, but its legacy lived on in every laugh, every bang, every spell turned sideways." Number 11, the Owl Post Office with magical deliveries. The Hogsmeade Post Office was loud, feather-filled and buzzing with purpose. Over 200 owls lived there, tucked into rows of tiny compartments, each labelled not with names, but with distance. There were scops for short village hops, tawny owls for countryside runs, and hulking barn owls trained to vanish into storms and return from across oceans. Hermione once stared at a glossy-eyed eagle owl perched near the front. "That one could probably reach Bulgaria," she said, and Ron flinched. "Let's not." Harry often came here with urgent letters clutched in his hands. When Sirius was in hiding, the post office was the safest choice. Hedwig, loyal and swift, was sometimes too recognizable, so Harry used a small, smoky owl with eyes like glass, one that vanished into fog and returned without a trace. In the Goblet of Fire, he sent a note to Sirius through this very building. "It's got to be quick and discreet," he muttered, watching the owl take off into the grey afternoon. The clerk, a squat man with ink-stained fingers, only nodded. "She flies clean," he said, "and keeps secrets." The building itself smelled of parchment, feathers and faint candle smoke. Rows of enchanted message tubes clinked behind the counter. Students queued up on weekends, sending chocolate-filled parcels and nervous Valentine notes. Luna Lovegood once claimed that one of the owls spoke to her. "It told me the moon was listening," she said dreamily, petting its beak. No one doubted her. In Hogsmeade, even the mail had magic. Number 12, hidden passageways connecting Hogsmeade and Hogwarts. Harry first learned about the secret passage behind the one-eyed witch during his 3rd year. Fred and George Weasley whispered the trick, Descendium. With that word and a firm tap of his wand, the hump-backed statue slid open to reveal a narrow, dusty chute. It led all the way to the basement of Honeydukes. The first time he used it, Harry was alone, invisible under his cloak, sneaking into Hogsmeade without a permission slip. The air in the tunnel was damp, the stone cold. But when he emerged under the shelves of fizzing sweets, it felt like magic, far deeper than transfiguration or charms. But that tunnel wasn't the only one. Argus Filch had once discovered a collapsed passage behind a tapestry on the 5th floor. He tried to seal it, but Fred and George found another way through, using a shrinking spell and some dangerous crawling. "Not for the claustrophobic?" George had laughed, brushing cobwebs from his robes. These passages weren't on any official map, except the Marauders map, of course. Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs knew them all. The twins said some of the paths even changed positions slightly, as if the castle itself were protecting them. One of the oldest rumours told of a tunnel starting beneath the Whomping Willow, leading to the Shrieking Shack. But another, even older, was said to run under the lake. No one had seen it, but Neville Longbottom once claimed he heard voices from the ground near the greenhouse. Professor Sprout dismissed it as root whisper, but there were whispers of Hengist of Woodcroft, founder of Hogsmeade, having built safe paths for wizards fleeing Muggles during the Dark Centuries. Not all the passages were safe. Some had caved in, others had become infested with magical fungi that hissed if disturbed. Peeves once dared a group of 2nd years into one such passage. None of them made it more than 10 feet before sprinting back, clothes reeking of dragon dung. Still, for those who knew where to look, the hidden paths between Hogwarts and Hogsmeade were more than shortcuts. They were veins of history, secrets of rebellion, and lifelines during war. The stone remembered, and sometimes it opened. Number 13, Honeydukes, paradise for sweet tooths and secret agents. Hogsmeade's beloved sweet shop, Honeydukes, was more than just a haven for sugar-loving students. Beneath its colourful displays of fizzing whizbees and acid pops hid one of Hogwarts' most closely guarded secrets, a secret passage that led directly into the castle. Fred and George Weasley, of course, knew about it. They passed the information to Harry during his 3rd year, helping him escape school grounds without Professor McGonagall's permission slip. "We found a way in," George whispered in the common room, "and it starts in Honeydukes' cellar." The shop's basement wasn't just a room filled with crates of sweets. It was the mouth of a hidden tunnel carved long ago, snaking under the hills from the castle to the village. It was cold, damp, and smelled of earth and old magic. Harry used it more than once to sneak into Hogsmeade, avoiding trouble while moving in and out unseen. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, he walked that tunnel by lantern light, feeling the thrill of secrecy under his feet. He set off at a brisk pace, eager to reach the other end before someone at Honeydukes came downstairs. Rowling writes, "But the magic of Honeydukes wasn't only in its architecture. Its shelves were filled with candies that blurred the line between treat and trick. A crimson-orange lolly would numb your tongue for 10 minutes. A packet of peppermint toads made your breath visible in cold shapes. And of course, the legendary chocolate frogs hopped on their own and came with enchanted cards. Dumbledore, Morgana, even Cersei herself. These weren't just sweets, they were artifacts of wizarding culture. They told stories, they carried spells. Some whispered that the owners, Ambrosius and Daisy Flume, were more than simple shopkeepers. It was said they had ties to the Order of the Phoenix, using their sweets to smuggle messages during the second rise of Voldemort. No proof ever surfaced, of course. But then again, who would look for secrets in a box of toffee? In a world where owls could be intercepted and fireplaces watched, maybe the safest message was the one wrapped in sugar. Number 14. Halloween in Hogsmeade, a magical festival. There are whispers that float through the frosty October air in Hogsmeade, whispers that even the ghosts at Hogwarts pause to listen to. On Halloween, the village undergoes a transformation so profound it feels as though the magic that usually hums quietly beneath its cobbled streets surges to the surface, pulsing in time with the flickering jack-o'-lanterns. The rooftops glisten with dew that glows faintly purple, a side effect of the seasonal charm work cast by Madame Rosmerta herself, who brews a special batch of butterbeer enhanced with cinnamon and warmth spells that make it impossible to feel lonely after the first sip. This isn't merely a festival of sweets and costumes. Halloween in Hogsmeade is a moment when enchantments thicken like mist and history becomes tangible. Each year, the village hosts the Parade of the Forgotten, a spectral procession of illusions cast by fifth-year illusionists from Hogwarts, supervised by Professor Flitwick. They conjure visages of long-lost witches and wizards from the early days of magical Britain. Almeric Sawbridge, who tamed the Hebridean Black. Morgana Fairshadow, whose dark hair dances like flame in the wind. The illusions walk silently through the street, heads bowed, veils of smoke trailing behind them. Visitors line the lanes in reverent silence, clutching their wands in hand, unsure if what they see is truly a spell or something older, something real. It was in Hogsmeade that Dumbledore once observed, "There is no place in Britain more saturated with celebratory enchantment than this village on All Hallows' Eve." The tradition dates back to 1637 when Cassandra Vole, a seer with a peculiar affinity for seasonal transitions, first cast a ritual to bring forth the veils. Her charm, intended to thin the barrier between worlds for just one night, resulted in a downpour of golden leaves that didn't touch the ground. They simply hung in the air like suspended time. It's said that Cassandra still appears each year in the form of an owl with amber eyes, watching the festival unfold from the highest chimney. The Three Broomsticks becomes a center of magical convergence. Students and professors alike gather inside, sipping on autumnal brews laced with whispers of nutmeg and memory dust. On October 31st, the pub opens a hidden chamber, known as the Moon Cellar, that only appears once a year. In this chamber, the air smells of wax and forgotten song, the candles flicker blue, and musicians enchanted from carved birchwood instruments begin to play. These magical musicians, made centuries ago by the wand-maker Thaddeus Thimble, produce no ordinary sound. Their melodies awaken dreams from the minds of those who listen. One year, Hermione Granger confessed she saw a vision of the Hogwarts library shelves flying like wings into the sky as she listened. The candy shop Honeydukes is perhaps the most famously transformed location during the Halloween season. Ambrosius Flume and his wife organize what they call the Night of Living Sweets, an evening where select candies temporarily grow tiny legs and scamper about the store. Some leap into visitors' hands, while others play hide-and-seek among the shelves. Most delightful is the tradition of the pumpkin fizz bombs, round orange confections that explode with a puff of sparkles and a ghostly giggle when bitten. In one particularly memorable year, a batch malfunctioned and continued laughing for days, echoing all the way to the Forbidden Forest. The Hogsmeade station is draped in floating lanterns shaped like phoenixes, each flickering with enchanted fire. The Hogwarts Express halts for a full hour at sunset to allow witches and wizards arriving from distant corners to disembark and participate. One such arrival was Xenophilius Lovegood, who came barefoot one year, wearing robes made of stitched-together leaves and chanting about the flux of ley lines under the harvest moon. Though the villagers considered him eccentric, no one denied that the moon that night glowed twice as large as usual, casting a shimmering silver veil across the village. Perhaps most unsettling, yet beloved, is the tradition of the pumpkin spirits. Crafted from ancient wards and bound by harvest rituals, these animated jack-o'-lanterns don't merely float, they think. Each spirit is created by fourth-year Hogwarts students as a class project under the watchful eyes of Professors Sprout and McGonagall. The most successful creations gain personalities and voices. They hover in clusters above the square, telling riddles and humming lullabies. One, named Balthazar, has been returning annually since 1978, reciting a poem about the stars that caused even Professor Trelawney to tear up. Zonko's joke shop joins the revelry by hosting the annual Cursed Costume Contest. The rules are simple. Each costume must be animated with a harmless jinx or hex. One year, a Hufflepuff student enchanted their costume to weep silently every time someone said pumpkin pasties. Another, more daring entry transformed the wearer into a mirror image of nearly headless Nick, head bobbing unsettlingly to the side. Albus Severus Potter once entered the contest dressed as his own father, Harry, complete with glasses that fogged up with genuine awkwardness spells. Older witches and wizards tell stories of a shadowy tradition no longer practiced openly called the Midnight Gate. As the legend goes, a stone archway, invisible by day, appears near the Shrieking Shack only on Halloween night. Those who pass through are said to experience visions of their future or their past. In 1981, a group of seventh years led by a reckless young Gryffindor named Elspeth Crouch attempted the crossing. Only 3 returned, each altered in ways they refused to explain. One would later become a revered unspeakable at the Department of Mysteries. The Shrieking Shack, haunted in its own right, becomes eerily quiet on Halloween. No moaning, no shuddering floors. Some believe that even ghosts refuse to compete with the raw power that flows through the village that night. Others say the shack listens and dreams. In 1996, Luna Lovegood stood outside its gate and whispered, "It's sleeping," before walking away with a content smile. Number 15. Winter in Hogsmeade. Beautiful but dangerous. Of all the places tied to Hogwarts, Hogsmeade glows with an enchanted allure, especially under snow. The only all-wizarding village in Britain, its winter transformation is breathtaking. Chimneys puffing with curls of white smoke, shop windows glowing like lanterns behind frosted glass, and narrow lanes buried under layers of snow that crunch under dragon-hide boots. But beneath the postcard-perfect charm of this magical hamlet lies something far more perilous, something that makes its beauty almost deceptive. Winter in Hogsmeade doesn't just summon warmth and nostalgia, it sharpens shadows, amplifies secrets, and veils dangers that not even the marauder's map can always detect. The Ministry of Magic, though often cumbersome in its dealings, has always recognized Hogsmeade as a sensitive node in the fabric of magical Britain. During the long winters, when visibility is low and even thestrals seem hesitant to fly, Ministry surveillance subtly intensifies. Enchanted owls patrol rooftops, detection charms linger over snowbanks, and anti-disapparition spells tighten like frost over the village's borders. These precautions, while unspoken to the general public, are enforced precisely because winter offers cover for secrecy, for rebellion, for movement that otherwise might draw attention. The snow, in truth, offers more than concealment. It absorbs footsteps, muffles voices, and glistens with deceptive innocence. That's why it's always been the season of clandestine meetings. During the First Wizarding War, Albus Dumbledore himself was known to apparate discreetly to Hogsmeade, his crimson cloak trailing over fresh snow, to confer with order members in the upper floor of the Hogshead. Few noticed the shadowed figure crossing the square because snow blurred the lines between mundane and magical. The same silence that makes Hogsmeade picturesque makes it perilous. It invites those who wish to hide. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, this tranquil facade turned treacherous when Harry, hunted and alone, used Polyjuice potion to sneak into Hogsmeade. Disguised as a wizard he did not know, covered in snow and uncertainty, he slipped into the village under cover of darkness. But the charm didn't last long. The village, once his sanctuary on school weekends, betrayed him almost instantly. A shriek filled the air. Not human, not magical in origin, but built by both. It was a caterwauling charm, placed by Severus Snape and keyed to unfamiliar magical signatures. Its cry shattered the night and echoed like the bells of Azkaban. The enchantment was no ordinary alarm. Designed to pierce illusions, it reacted to unauthorized presence, especially during wartime when security was absolute. "He's here." "Potter's in the village," came the cries, but not from those with voices. It was the sound of magical paranoia. The same snow that had hidden Harry now marked him with footprints and melting edges. It was winter that made the trap inescapable. It was the snow that slowed their escape and the cold that bit at every exposed inch of skin as he and Ron ducked behind barrels, barely avoiding patrols of Death Eaters sweeping the lanes. But even that night, as dangerous as it was, echoed with past tragedies and betrayals. Hogsmeade has always attracted attention in winter. Students think it's because of the butterbeer steam and Honeydukes winter specials, but those are only distractions. The real reason is deeper, older. For centuries, witches and wizards have used the cover of snow to meet, conspire, and vanish. During Grindelwald's rise, records show increased movement through Hogsmeade, wandering witches in heavy robes slipping past the Shrieking Shack, and informants exchanging parchment beside snow-laden benches. Some disappeared after those meetings. Their last known location? Just outside Madame Puddifoot's tea shop, beneath the frosted windows adorned with cherubs. The village itself seems to participate in the secrecy. Spells behave oddly in Hogsmeade in winter, as if the snow dulls their reaction or absorbs their residue. Traces vanish faster, footprints dissolve in the blink of an eye, and magical signatures fade beneath accumulating drifts. The snow is a natural ally to those who wish to remain unseen, but like all allies in the magical world, it is unpredictable. What helps one moment can betray the next. Severus Snape, as headmaster, knew this. His placement of the caterwauling charm key wasn't arbitrary. He understood that Harry, whose movements were erratic and desperate, might one day return to the village. Snape set the spell precisely because he knew the snow made surveillance unreliable. "They've put up a new spell," Hermione would later say. "It must be to catch anyone who comes in under Polyjuice or an invisibility cloak." But it was more than that. It was a net cast over the village's soul. It punished those who came in secrecy and rewarded those who watched with silent vigilance. Even Aberforth Dumbledore, keeper of secrets and barman of the Hogshead, had to bend to the dangers of winter. The enchanted mirror through which he watched Harry's movements was only a fragment of his defences. His pub, seemingly abandoned, was warded with charms not found in standard spellbooks. It had to be. Hogsmeade in winter was a battleground, not of duels, but of whispers. In those days, even the clink of a bottle could be mistaken for the unsheathing of a wand. One mistake, one step in the snow, too loud, could bring down an entire squad of snatchers. The irony of Hogsmeade's winter charm is that it often lulled its visitors into carelessness. Tourists and students marvelled at the icicles hanging from Zonko's joke shop, while just around the corner, dark, cloaked figures watched from the shadows. Even before the war reached its climax, signs of danger bled through the frost. Fred and George Weasley once joked that their sneakerscopes always went wild in Hogsmeade. What they didn't realize was that the magical interference wasn't due to faulty products, but due to the sheer volume of concealment charms used by villagers and visitors alike. The Shrieking Shack itself, long thought haunted, gained a more sinister reputation in winter. Its groans, carried on the wind and amplified by snow-muffled air, became chilling wails. Students believed it was the wind, some whispered it was ghosts, but the truth is more grounded and more unsettling. Lupin, during his years at Hogwarts, had his transformations masked by snowstorms. The winter offered a cruel courtesy, it hid the screams. Years later, the same structure would witness the death of Severus Snape, its boards soaked in blood, its walls echoing the last gasps of a man who lived in grey and died in silence. Number 16. Madame Scribble's Quill Shop. Madame Scriber's Quill Shop, nestled inconspicuously between the more popular establishments in Hogsmeade, has often gone unnoticed by casual visitors. Tourists and students would hurry past its modest oak door, drawn instead to Honeydukes' sugary charms or Zonko's noisy displays. Yet for a certain kind of student, those who found comfort in ink, parchment, and perfection, this little shop was a sanctuary. The store had no grand signage, no animated displays in its window, only a small bronze plate that read, Madame Scriber's, Quills for the Keen. For those who valued quiet excellence over spectacle, this plate gleamed like a beacon. The shop itself was always filled with a faint scent of old parchment and crushed lavender. Inside, mahogany shelves towered to the ceiling, cradling hundreds of different quills, each tagged with meticulous labels written in looping, flawless script. Madame Scriber, a small, silver-haired witch with half-moon spectacles, rarely left the back of the store. She moved like parchment in wind, delicate and precise. Her specialty quills, those imbued with minor charms, were particularly popular among Ravenclaws and Slytherins, but no student appreciated them more than Hermione Granger. While Hermione's visits to Flourish and Blots were legendary for their duration and intensity, few knew that she made regular, almost ritualistic trips to Madame Scriber's during Hogsmeade weekends. According to an anecdote recorded by fellow student Susan Bones, Hermione once spent nearly 40 minutes testing a single batch of quills for their ink control and resistance to splatter. The quills she favoured, goose-feathered, lightly charmed with a self-correcting spell, were known to subtly suggest better grammar while writing. They didn't rewrite her words, only refined them, as if encouraging the mind to follow the path of clarity and elegance. It wasn't only their functionality that appealed to her. The quills came in protective cases embroidered with delicate runes that glowed faintly when the quill was perfectly aligned with its user's magical rhythm. Hermione had once explained to Ginny that a wand and a quill aren't so different, they both channel expression. These quills became a quiet symbol of her intellectual devotion. They never appeared in official school inventories and no class syllabus demanded them. But for those who cared, they mattered deeply. Neville Longbottom, for one, owed more than he ever admitted to those same quills. During his third year, he struggled relentlessly with his written potions assignments. Professor Snape, never known for patience or leniency, would return Neville's essays, slashed with red ink and biting remarks. After one especially brutal critique, "Did your toad write this, Longbottom? At least a toad wouldn't confuse gillyweed with dittany," Neville nearly gave up. It was Hermione who suggested he try one of Madame Scriber's guiding quills. With her help, he selected a crow feather model, sturdier than the goose but charmed to reinforce sentence structure. That quill, Neville would later say in a quiet moment to Luna Lovegood, was the first thing that made him feel capable on paper. His writing improved, his confidence followed, and when he finally passed his next potions essay, graded by a reluctant but silent Snape, he tucked the quill away in a drawer, wrapped in velvet. Years later, when he became a professor himself, he kept it on his desk, not to use, but to remember. The magic in the quills was not dramatic. There were no bursts of light, no whispers of ancient runes. but their power lay in the subtle push they offered. Parvati Patil once confessed in her journal that writing with one of Madame Scriber's peacock feather quills helped her focus on beauty even in arithmancy essays. The charm embedded in her quill encouraged fluid calligraphy, and she believed it helped her think more clearly. Whether that was the charm or the confidence it gave her remained uncertain. What was certain, however, was the craftsmanship. Each quill was hand-prepared by Madame Scriber herself, who enchanted them with tiny, elegant spells sourced from Old Welsh and Cornish scrolls. She never revealed her incantations, but curious students who attempted to copy the effects often failed. George Weasley, in his 6th year, once tried to enchant a batch of quills for fun. Instead of aiding spelling, they caused every written sentence to end in random barnyard sounds. He eventually gifted one to Percy, claiming it would make his ministry memos more lively. Even Professor McGonagall once acknowledged the quality of Scriber's work. In a staff meeting, overheard by a passing ghost, most likely nearly headless Nick, she reportedly said, "If only some of our essays had the same structure as Madame Scriber's quills." Coming from her, it was high praise. It was even rumoured that Dumbledore had used a Scriber quill when writing his acceptance letter to Tom Riddle. The record, of course, remains unconfirmed, but the myth lingers in dusty corners of Hogwarts. Scriber's shop also served another quieter role in student life. For some, it was a place of recovery. When Luna Lovegood had her schoolbooks thrown into the lake by bullies, it was Madame Scriber who gave her a new quill free of charge. It was shaped like a moonbeam, slender, silver, with a charm that shimmered gently in candlelight. Luna never told anyone, but she kept the quill tucked into her robe's inner pocket, calling it her quiet guardian. Though Hogwarts had its own supply of writing materials, students with a taste for excellence or a need for support made their way to that little door in Hogsmeade. The enchanted bells above it chimed in a peculiar key, not quite audible unless one was paying attention. Once inside, the air was always warm, as if time slowed slightly. The walls whispered with the rustle of feathers, and there was an invisible sense of order, of thoughtfulness. The very space seemed to approve of effort. Hermione's fondness for the shop extended even beyond graduation. When she returned to Hogwarts during the Battle of Hogwarts, she paused near the entrance to Hogsmeade, eyes catching on the broken sign of Scribers. The window had cracked, the door hung slightly ajar. Later, after the war, she helped restore the shop, funding a small scholarship for Muggle-born students to receive their first quills from Madame Scribers. It was never publicized. But Madame Scriber, then well into her 90s, had framed a letter of thanks on the wall. It was written in Hermione's unmistakable script. Number 17, The Brawl, when Death Eaters invaded. It was in the 6th year at Hogwarts when the illusion of safety finally shattered. Outside the gates, under a grey and rumbling sky, the village of Hogsmeade bore silent witness to the rise of something darker than any snowfall or winter wind. Once a place of butterbeer warmth and Zonko's laughter, the cobbled streets now echoed with tension. The familiar charm of the only all-wizarding village in Britain had not been enough to keep out the shadow crawling across the magical world. In Half-Blood Prince, J.K. Rowling offered a grim reminder. No place, no matter how steeped in magic and tradition, was beyond the reach of fear. The incident outside the Three Broomsticks happened in late winter, but the chill in the air that day had less to do with the weather and more with the creeping anxiety that had wrapped itself around the village. Students from Hogwarts, temporarily freed from the stone walls and ancient corridors of the castle, wandered Hogsmeade with caution rather than excitement. There had been whispers, students returning to the castle with more than sweets and prank items. They carried rumours. Madame Rosmerta was behaving strangely, Honeydukes had a back room no one entered anymore, and the post office owls seemed nervous, refusing to take off. But on that particular weekend, something real happened, something unmistakably dark. Outside the familiar warmth of the Three Broomsticks, a small group of 6th-year students lingered in the street. Among them was Katie Bell, who had only recently recovered from a near-fatal encounter with a cursed necklace, a gift intended for Dumbledore, delivered by the unwitting hand of a friend. Her laughter didn't ring as freely anymore, and Lee Jordan noted that she flinched when shadows passed too close. Beside her stood Michael Corner and a hesitant Seamus Finnegan, both looking toward the pub with apprehension. They weren't alone. Two men stood beneath the flickering lamplight of the narrow lane, cloaked not only in black, but in menace. They weren't wearing masks, no Death Eater robes to declare their allegiance, but something about their posture, the icy calm with which they surveyed the students, betrayed their intentions. Later, Hermione would remark that their wands were already in hand. They weren't shopping, she would say, with chilling certainty. They were waiting. The brawl broke out not with a spell, but a shout. Dean Thomas had noticed one of the men brush past Katie with too much purpose, and the sharpness of his tone drew immediate attention. "Watch it," was all he had said, but the silence that followed was louder than a scream. One of the strangers turned, smiled, and in a motion, too quick for anyone to stop, aimed his wand. The spell didn't land. Seamus was faster, throwing up a shield charm that rippled through the air like broken glass. But it didn't matter. Hogsmeade had erupted. It wasn't a duel. Duels are structured, measured, even respectful. This was a chaotic clash of red and blue lights, scattering students and cracking windows. Madame Rosmerta flung open the doors of the 3 Broomsticks, shouting for everyone to get inside. A shelf of butterbeer collapsed behind her as a stray curse ricocheted through the doorway. Filch, who had oddly been present in the village that day for reasons no one ever clarified, tried to blow his whistle. It exploded in his mouth, leaving his face smeared with soot. The 2 men were later identified, not by the ministry which claimed ignorance, but by Fred and George Weasley, who, ever resourceful, had kept tabs on certain names from their father's conversations. Carver Muldoon and Rook Leach, George whispered to Harry later that night, hired hands, not branded with the dark mark, but loyal. The kind of scum Voldemort uses when he wants something messy, deniable. The true horror of the day wasn't the violence, it was what it revealed. The wards around Hogsmeade had weakened. The enchantments that once buzzed faintly over the village like an unseen net had thinned, stretched too far by fear and betrayal. Someone from the inside had given information. Someone like Madame Rosmerta, who, as it turned out, had been placed under the Imperious curse by Draco Malfoy. Her once cheerful demeanour had dimmed, her gestures stiff, and eyes unfocused. She served the invaders drinks without blinking, passed along cursed objects, and when questioned, she had no memory of any of it. Harry's anger after the discovery was immediate and sharp. In Half-Blood Prince, Rowling writes, "She's been working against us for months, and we never even noticed. She helped them get Katie cursed. She helped them smuggle in the necklace, the poisoned mead." There was betrayal in every word. Hogsmeade had always been a haven, the butterbeer-scented reward at the end of long weeks of schoolwork and danger. Now it was compromised. In the days following the attack, shopkeepers began shuttering their doors. Derwent Shimpling, owner of the tiny bookstall that sold Muggle magic crossovers, packed up overnight. Zonko's joke shop hung a permanent, closed until further notice sign. Even Honeydukes started limiting entry, no more than 4 students at a time, and every bag inspected. The security felt hollow, more ritual than reassurance. Madame Puddifoot's tea shop, never a stronghold of bravery to begin with, closed indefinitely after a jinxed love potion sent 3 students into magical hysterics. The joke among Ravenclaws was that the tea had turned into Veritaserum, and couples walked out knowing far too much about each other. But beneath the humour was a truth. The magic of Hogsmeade had curdled. The spells were still there, the buildings unchanged, but the soul of the place had shifted. What made the whole scene even more terrifying was its ambiguity. These weren't marked Death Eaters dueling Order members. These were shadow operatives, infiltrators using fear like a tool. The brawl itself was brief. Aurors arrived late, and only after students had managed to hold the attackers off long enough for them to vanish. There were no arrests, no headlines, just whispers. From a storytelling perspective, this was a brilliant and horrifying stroke by rolling. She didn't need to place her characters in a burning building to show danger. She placed them on a street they knew, outside a pub they loved, and then introduced quiet chaos. The emotional weight came from recognition. This was supposed to be safe. It wasn't anymore. Aberforth Dumbledore, long a silent observer behind the bar of the Hogshead, made a rare appearance in the aftermath. He wasn't there to comfort. He issued warnings. To Neville, who had taken to wandering alone, "You think the Death Eaters care if you're a kid? You're a name on a list, boy. Keep your wand ready." Coming from a man who had seen too many wars, the words sank deep. The attack didn't change the war's outcome. It wasn't a battle of historical consequence, but it marked a turning point in tone. From then on, every visit to Hogsmeade carried an edge. Students travelled in groups, professors patrolled the entrances, and Professors Flitwick and McGonagall took turns casting protection spells over shop entrances. Even Dumbledore seemed heavier, his gaze lingering on the horizon when he returned from meetings outside the castle. This particular event, though rarely mentioned in detail in the fandom, functions as one of the few moments when the world beyond Hogwarts pierces the student experience directly. For all the lessons in defense against the dark arts, nothing prepared them for the randomness of that fight. The Dark Lord wasn't the one who struck that day, but his shadow was in every flash of light, every shaking hand, every breath held behind a wooden door. In revisiting the pages of Half-Blood Prince, we find these lines. Fear had crept into even the most familiar corners. That was the message of Hogsmeade's turning point. Fear isn't always loud. Sometimes it sips a drink, passes a package, or walks quietly through a snowy street, and when it arrives, it changes everything. For the younger students, first and second years who had never been to Hogsmeade and had dreamed of their first butterbeer, it became a place they feared more than the Forbidden Forest. And for the older ones, especially those like Neville, Luna, and Ginny, who would soon lead the resistance at Hogwarts, it was a sobering call. The war wasn't coming, it was already there. What's most tragic is the way the village itself, unchanged in bricks and windows, stood like a haunted shell of its former self. The snow still fell, the bells still rang, but the joy was gone. And perhaps that is what Voldemort's forces did best, not destroying buildings, but gutting places of their hope. In the end, Hogsmeade endured. It stood through the final battles, and it stood long after Voldemort's fall. But those who remember the 6th year remember it differently. They remember the scream outside the 3 broomsticks. They remember the trembling of spells clashing in the air. And they remember, most of all, the silence that followed, the knowledge that even the warmest places could be turned cold. Number 18, the magical laundry, myth or reality. On a chilly October afternoon during Harry's 4th year at Hogwarts, a group of 4th-year Hufflepuffs returned from Hogsmeade, speaking in hushed tones. Ernie Macmillan clutched a bundle of suspiciously well-pressed robes, the seams humming faintly as though stitched with a memory of magic. Hannah Abbott, usually the skeptical one, looked dazed and claimed her favourite mismatched socks had somehow reunited. It was that day the legend resurfaced of the enchanted laundromat in Hogsmeade. For some it was a quaint folk tale passed between students like Bertie Bott's beans. For others it was a riddle wrapped in lint and lavender-scented steam. Hogsmeade had long concealed secrets in its snow-dusted alleys and whispering chimneys. Most eyes were drawn to the obvious, Honeydukes, Zonkos, the 3 broomsticks, but those who strayed beyond the cobbled veins of the village sometimes spoke of narrow streets that shifted subtly, stores that only opened on Thursdays when the fog was just right, and an old wooden sign that read, "Magical Maintenance, Discreet Services Rendered." The story went that this was not a maintenance shop at all, but a laundromat where garments weren't merely cleaned, but transformed. Luna Lovegood was one of the few who claimed first-hand experience. During her 3rd year, she vanished from a group returning from Madame Puddifoot's, only to reappear near the Shrieking Shack, arms full of robes that sparkled slightly in the dim light. When questioned, she merely said, "The bubbles sang." Her robes were immaculate for the rest of the term. Even Filch, who once caught her slipping through a first-floor tapestry, noted in his log. Lovegood's cloak unusually pristine, suspect house elf collusion or prohibited laundering charms. Among the more persistent stories was that of Cedric Diggory. Known for his charm and poise, Cedric's robes were always freshly pressed, despite the mud-caked Quidditch matches. A fifth-year Ravenclaw named Maribel Dawlish swore she saw him slip into an alley in beside Dervish and Bangies, holding a suspiciously bulging satchel. He looked both embarrassed and determined, she later said, as though surrendering to something deeply personal, like laundry. After that, his dueling cloak began to shimmer faintly, repelling hexes more effectively. "Just good tailoring," he insisted, but Hufflepuffs whispered about steam that smelled faintly of thyme and wizard's wool. The lore surrounding the laundromat deepened during the chaos of the Second Wizarding War. Some claimed that members of the Order of the Phoenix used it to charm protective enchantments into their robes. "It's not about cleanliness," said a veiled article in the Quibbler. "It's about preparation. Thread remembers what it's touched. Stain, sorrow, spell, everything leaves a trace." The article mentioned an establishment in Hogsmeade known only to those who have known loss and carry it in their sleeves. It was written under the pseudonym Bubblewand, but most believed it was Xenophilius Lovegood himself. According to this article, the laundromat didn't have a front door. It appeared only to those who carried at least one dirty sock in their satchel. The sock, enchanted with an obscure summoning charm, would begin to twitch once near the location. Neville Longbottom once found himself in an unfamiliar alley after a herbology excursion, clutching a particularly grimy pair of socks after falling into a patch of screaming mandrake. He claimed the street elongated strangely, the shop fronts breathing like sleepy beasts. At the end stood a narrow building wrapped in ivy that hissed when touched. "I don't remember going in," he later said, "but I remember coming out and my robes had no scorch marks." Inside, the space was rumoured to be infinitely larger than it appeared. Floating copper basins stirred themselves. The air was humid with charm-laced mists. There were shelves of folded clothes, each labelled not by name, but by a feeling: resolve, restoration, reckoning. Some robes were embroidered with runes that hadn't been taught at Hogwarts in centuries. A Gryffindor alumna, Julia Ketteridge, who went on to become a ministry cryptographer, once confessed under Veritasium that her most powerful spellcasting cloak had gone through the wash in Hogsmeade and came out with pockets that hid my doubt. Rumours tied the laundromat to a retired Hogwarts house elf named Pilbin. Once in service to headmaster Armando Dippet, Pilbin vanished after a dispute with a particularly cruel transfiguration professor. Students claimed to have seen him in Hogsmeade decades later, pushing a squeaky laundry cart and humming lullabies in Elvish. He was said to wear a robe that never wrinkled, no matter how tightly he bent. Some suggested Pilbin had founded the laundromat as a sanctuary, not for himself, but for clothing weary of carrying the burdens of their owners. Even Professor McGonagall, during a rare light-hearted moment in Transfiguration class, once remarked, "Some enchantments are best absorbed over time like tea in linen." Her robe that day bore a subtle shimmer, and Lavender Brown muttered to Parvati, "That's definitely a laundromat robe. Look at those hems." No one had the courage to ask her outright, but when Lee Jordan tried to investigate for a Hogwarts radio segment, his recording device mysteriously malfunctioned near Scrivenshaft's Quill shop. The only audible phrase was, "It must be truly unwashed to enter." There was also the curious case of Zacharias Smith. Known for his frequent complaints and uncanny ability to attract classroom mishaps, he returned from Hogsmeade one weekend profoundly changed. His robes, formerly always rumpled, were so crisp they seemed to resist gravity. He spoke less, observed more. "It's the starch," joked Seamus Finnegan, but some believed Zacharias had entered the laundromat not by accident, but because something in him had finally grown unkempt enough to be seen. The enchanted laundromat may never have been an official part of wizarding infrastructure, but the Department of Magical Artifacts kept a file labelled HME LX7. Filed between Shrieking Shack anomalies, and Mirror of Erased Relocation, it detailed a mysterious building with high thaumaturgic readings and erratic apparition signatures. The file's final note, dated May 1996, read simply, "Invisible unless approached by one carrying garment infused with guilt, growth, or grime. Magic tied to personal transformation." Hogsmeade shopkeepers spoke of it indirectly. Madame Rosmerta once commented that during stormy evenings her firewood smelled faintly of citrus and soap, though she hadn't burned anything unusual. Ambrose Wagtail, owner of the wizarding music shop, swore that one time he heard a choir of humming voices coming from behind his back wall. "They sang in harmonies like towels drying on a line," he said, wiping tears from his eyes. "I've never composed a better lullaby since." There's one particularly compelling account, that of Daisy Fernglass, a squib born into a pure-blood family. Cast out and forgotten, Daisy worked in the outpost in Hogsmeade. One snowy night, while delivering a letter for Professor Sprout, she slipped on a patch of ice and tore her coat. She was too embarrassed to return home in tatters and wandered the streets crying. Her satchel held her brother's dirty socks, which she had been washing by hand. She claimed the bag grew warm. Then an alley twisted before her, and the ivy-curtained door appeared. She entered, and for hours the air whispered comfort. She emerged with a new coat, identical to her old one, but enchanted to be impervious to cold. That winter, for the first time, she didn't feel forgotten. Even Fred and George Weasley, lovers of prank and chaos, treated the legend with a reverence bordering on superstition. They claimed that one of their most successful prototypes, a self-cleaning school uniform, was inspired by a vision George had during an unusual fever in Hogsmeade. He spoke of a place where soap behaved like memory and clothes folded themselves out of respect, not magic. "We never found it," Fred once said, but sometimes if you hold a sock too long, you feel a pull. It's difficult to say if the laundromat was ever real, or if it was born from the collective longing of students who, amid battles, heartbreak, and examinations, wished for something gentle. A place that did not ask questions but took in what was soiled and returned it healed. Hogwarts, for all its grandeur, did not always mend what life had frayed. Perhaps Hogsmeade made up for that in soap bubbles and steam. The idea that enchantments could be sewn into fabric was not new. Dumbledore himself once wore robes that changed colour depending on his mood. In The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore, Rita Skeeter mentioned a curious entry in his Gringotts vault. A bundle of folded garments wrapped in ivy silk tagged "Property of the Laundry." Whether this was true or merely another fabrication remains unknown, but the name sparked immediate speculation. In recent years, some alumni have sought the laundromat deliberately. Aura trainee Dennis Creevy organized a covert search operation in 2004. "If it exists," he said in a letter to his brother Colin's memorial, "then it's not a place, it's a moment, a kind of magic, not taught but given. You don't find it by needing clean clothes, you find it when you're finally ready to wear yourself anew." Perhaps the magic of the laundromat was not in soap or water, but in the way wizards and witches carried themselves after. Less wrinkled, more stitched, still scarred, but with hems held firm by invisible threads. That was the true enchantment, the idea that something somewhere could care for your burdens and return them to you softer, stronger, whole. Number 19. Underground Meetings of Dumbledore's Army. When Dolores Umbridge clamped her iron grip around the halls of Hogwarts, the school changed. No longer was it a sanctuary of magical learning and exploration. It became a place of surveillance, whispering paranoia, and rigid control. Under Educational Decree No. 24, all student organizations were banned unless expressly approved by the High Inquisitor herself. The corridors, once filled with laughter and friendly duels, turned silent. Even the portraits seemed to scowl more often, and suits of armor grew eerily still. But where oppression sets its roots, rebellion often blooms, and it bloomed not within the castle, but just beyond its reach, in the snow-dusted village of Hogsmeade. Hogsmeade the only all-wizarding village in Britain, had always been a haven for students looking for a bit of butterbeer and a break from essays. But in the shadow of Umbridge's tyranny, it became something more. It became a crucible for revolution. Far from the watchful eyes of the inquisitorial squad, hidden behind the clatter of mugs and the hum of enchanted music, plans were whispered, and resistance took shape. The village had seen generations of Hogwarts students come and go, but never before had it served as the staging ground for a secret army. The heart of this uprising pulsed within the walls of the Three Broomsticks. The pub, known for its warmth and Rosmerta's generous pause, had long been a favourite of students. But during Umbridge's reign, it became an unlikely war room. It was here that Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, and Ron Weasley met with their trusted allies, not just to gossip or sip butterbeer, but to lay the foundations of what would become Dumbledore's army. On one particular snowy Saturday, the back room of the Three Broomsticks was filled not with warmth, but with tension. Neville Longbottom stood near the fireplace, his hands shaking not from the cold, but from anticipation. Luna Lovegood, wearing a necklace of butterbeer corks, hummed softly as she waited. Cho Chang sat alone by the window, her gaze distant, her loyalty not yet fully solidified. The moment Harry arrived, eyes turned to him, not as the boy who lived, but as the boy who dared to fight. It wasn't just the pub that cradled rebellion. Behind Honeydukes, past the alley where deliveries were made and rarely anyone lingered, students found shelter among crates of enchanted sugar quills and fizzing whizbees. This narrow space, hidden between laughter and sweets, became a pathway for messages. Zachariah Smith passed notes to Ginny Weasley here, coded in symbols only members of the DA could understand. Their parchment glowed faintly with spells designed by Hermione, charms that would burn the message to ash if it fell into the wrong hands. One cannot speak of Hogsmeade's role in the resistance without mentioning the Hogshead Inn. The dingy, shadowy pub had long carried a reputation for attracting questionable clientele, and it was precisely this dubious reputation that offered perfect cover. It was a very gloomy place, and the barman didn't say much, Hermione had observed. It was true. The barman, Aberforth Dumbledore, brother to the legendary headmaster, watched the students with squinting eyes and a suspicious air. But beneath his gruff demeanour lay quiet approval. He never questioned the strange meetings. He never asked why Hogwarts students came in pairs, in odd formations, never too many at once. During the infamous first meeting that would launch the DA, the Hogshead bore witness to an unusual gathering. Hermione had placed protective charms around the room. "You don't want Umbridge finding out you're meeting like this," she had said. She cast Muffliato and a series of detection spells that would alert them to any unwanted presence. They came, not as children, but as warriors in the making. Dean Thomas, Seamus Finnegan, Lavender Brown, Colin Creevey. They weren't just names on a class list anymore. They were building something. After that meeting, the Three Broomsticks saw waves of activity. Padma and Parvati Patil began using the upper floor to relay news. The pub, ever warm, ever noisy, served as the perfect cover. Ron, disguised in a slightly enchanted Slytherin scarf, one he claimed he took as a joke, monitored who entered and exited. Fred and George Weasley, brilliant in chaos, smuggled in experimental extendable ears to detect threats beyond the pub's door. Fred once slipped one under the table where Crabbe and Goyle were talking. The twins later learned of Umbridge's new decree before it was posted. As weeks passed, the village's very cobblestones seemed to hum with tension. Students devised signals, a flick of the wand, a scratch behind the ear, a tap of the heel, gestures that meant safe or leave or follow me. They left enchanted coins, a clever invention by Hermione based on the galleon's magical properties, where numbers changed to signal meeting times. "We've got to be careful," Harry once reminded the group. "One mistake and she'll shut this down." But Hogsmeade stood guard. Even Madame Puddifoot's tea shop, ridiculous with lace and porcelain, once hosted a secret meeting. After all, Who would suspect revolutionaries sipping rose-petal tea? Cho Chang, still reeling from the loss of Cedric, found brief comfort there with Harry, but even those moments were not purely romantic. They discussed Umbridge, the growing pressure, the fears students whispered at night in their dormitories. In the flickering candlelight, they planned. Aberforth Dumbledore became an unspoken patron of the rebellion. He once handed Susan Bones a note, no words, just a small symbol, the Eye of Dumbledore. It meant he'd keep watch. He didn't smile, he rarely did. But when Harry returned the next weekend, Aberforth passed him a butterbeer on the house. It was his way of saying, "I see you, I believe in what you're doing." During the winter holidays, when most students had gone home, a few stayed behind: Harry, Hermione, Neville. The snow in Hogsmeade fell heavy, and for a moment the world was silent. Yet even then, inside the shuttered Hog's Head, spells flew through the air. Disarming charms, shields, silent curses. The DA was growing stronger. Expelliarmus echoed in muffled bursts. No longer merely a school spell, it became a mantra of defiance. On one occasion, when Umbridge began suspecting students of meeting outside Hogwarts, she questioned Filch about Hogsmeade activity, but the caretaker, more obsessed with catching Peeves than espionage, reported only vague sightings. "I saw Potter sneaking behind Honeydukes," he said once, "but the brat vanished before I could hex him." Umbridge dispatched members of the inquisitorial squad to patrol the village, but even they were hesitant. Pansy Parkinson once wandered too close to the Hog's Head and was nearly hexed by an old warlock who mistook her for a ministry spy. Secrecy was paramount. Hannah Abbott created decoy routes, entering through Honeydukes and exiting behind Zonko's, using the tunnel Fred and George had once mapped years prior. Lavender Brown helped craft mirror messages, reflections on polished glass that displayed only to those who knew the incantation. The DA became a living entity and Hogsmeade its pulse. The walls of the 3 Broomsticks saw maps sketched on napkins, spells practiced in whispers, and oaths sworn in candlelight. Angelina Johnson once brought in a list of names from Gryffindor's Quidditch team, students who, though not in the DA yet, could be counted on in an emergency. The lines blurred between friend and soldier. This wasn't just about Umbridge anymore. It was about the principle, about refusing to be silenced. As the year drew on and Umbridge grew bolder, the DA's reliance on Hogsmeade only deepened. Spells learned behind locked doors now echoed in practice behind Scrivenshaft's Quill shop. The alley beside the Quill shop became known as Whisper Lane among students. Here, spells were tested, messages exchanged, and passwords rehearsed. Ginny once stunned a crow as target practice. It flew away unharmed but rattled, just like the students. They were frightened, constantly, but they were brave in their fear. And then came the night when all of it unraveled. Marietta Edgecombe, trembling under the threat of her mother's ministry job, revealed the DA's existence, the location of meetings, the names. The consequences were immediate. Harry was dragged before Umbridge. "You formed this army?" she asked, incredulous. "Dumbledore's army." The name alone was an act of defiance. But even as Dumbledore took the blame, even as he vanished from Hogwarts in a blaze of fire and phoenix feathers, the truth remained. The army had been real. The rebellion had grown. And it was Hogsmeade that cradled it into life. Despite the setback, the embers of resistance never died. Dumbledore's army returned, stronger, more determined in the years to come. And they would remember the crooked sign of the Hog's Head, the taste of butterbeer in cold hands, and the snowy corners behind Honeydukes, where freedom had been born. Hogsmeade was never just a village. It was a fortress of memory, of magic, and of quiet defiance. And long after Umbridge's rule had crumbled, long after the final battle at Hogwarts, those who had once walked its enchanted streets would remember how it felt to fight, hidden, whispered, together. And that is why Hogsmeade is more than just a day trip. It's the birthplace of courage. Number 20, enchanted lanterns that read emotions. The streets of Hogsmeade were rarely silent, But there were moments in winter, especially near midnight, when even the wind seemed to hush. The snow would drift gently through the darkness, muffling footsteps and coating rooftops in white. And in those moments, the only sign of life came from the village's lanterns. They didn't flicker like the torches at Hogwarts, nor sputter out in storms. Instead, they glowed with a curious consistency, too steady, too alive. It was common knowledge that they were enchanted, but few knew just how deep the magic ran. Each lantern, swaying softly on its iron hook, held more than fire. Old Abernathy Elridge, the former caretaker of the three Broomsticks, once claimed that the lights were charmed by witches from the time of the founders. His tale was always the same. The lanterns could feel you. They could sense your fear, your rage, your hidden guilt. It was not a common enchantment, nor one taught at Hogwarts. It was blood-bound, some whispered, tied to the spirit of the village itself. And it was not always friendly. In the winter of 1997, when Hogsmeade fell under shadow during the height of Voldemort's return, the lanterns told their own story. On the night of February 14th, a Death Eater patrol passed through the main square. Students watching from the windows of Madame Puddifoot's tea shop saw the lights dim one by one until the street looked soaked in blood-red shadows. The snow, once white, reflected the angry hue. There were no spells cast, no words spoken, but every watching soul felt it. The fear, thick as frost, the malice, clear in the flickering glow. Hermione Granger once noted the phenomenon in the margins of Hogwarts. A history. In a brief scribble she added to her own copy, she wrote, "Lanterns in Hogsmeade do not extinguish. Even in the blizzards of 1714, when no fire could be kept alive, they burned. Magical in origin, but responsive to emotion, possibly ancient protective magic, though undocumented. She'd noticed their behavior during her third year, especially on the day Sirius Black was rumored to be nearby. As she, Harry, and Ron crept through the alley behind Zonko's joke shop, the lantern above them gave a low, uneasy flicker, though no wind stirred. Filch, the cantankerous caretaker of Hogwarts, despised the lanterns. He once tried to replace one after it had shattered during a violent storm, claiming the broken glass glared at him while he cleaned it up. But his replacement lantern never stayed lit. Only when Professor Flitwick reinstalled a replica, charmed according to ancient village records, did the light return. Even then, Flitwick noted in a staff meeting that the lanterns in Hogsmeade are tied to more than spellcraft. They're part of something older. Locals have whispered that the lanterns were once guardians, not of people, but of intentions. A person walking with honesty and peace would pass under them with steady golden light, but if a heart harboured violence, the light would dim, shift hue, or tremble. Madame Rosmerta told a story about a visitor in the early 1980s who passed under 4 lanterns, and each one flickered red. The man left without a word. 2 days later, news arrived from London. The same man had been arrested for hexing a Muggle family in Diagon Alley. "I don't know how they know," she said, "but they do know." Fred and George Weasley turned the lanterns into a game. During their 4th year, they dared students to walk down the main road after curfew just to see if the lights would flicker. They claimed it was the best way to reveal crushes, lies, and secret plans. One night, Seamus Finnegan passed under 5 without a twitch until the last one near the post office pulsed with red for a heartbeat. The twins teased him for weeks. Seamus never said what he'd been thinking. During the first rise of the Dark Lord, the lanterns became a form of silent resistance. When Death Eaters entered Hogsmeade, the lights would dim so drastically that villagers could track their path through the village by the trail of red shadows. More than once, a Death Eater would stop, sensing the eerie shift in glow, unnerved by the lantern's judgment. Hogsmeade never had its own militia, but the lights were watchers, protectors, witnesses. They revealed more than words ever could. In 1981, shortly before Voldemort's fall, Hogsmeade saw one of its most chilling nights. Travers, Mulciber, and Rookwood walked through the square at midnight, cloaks dragging through the slush. Behind them, the lights turned red one after another, a slow chain of crimson-like blood seeping through snow. Later that night, a Muggle-born wizard named Elias Thorne was found stunned and bound behind Honeydukes. He claimed the lanterns were the only reason he survived. "I saw them turn, and I ran," he told Dumbledore. "Didn't wait to see who was coming." Some speculated that the lanterns were connected to the protective charms surrounding Hogwarts. Others believed they were powered by enchanted flame imported from the Department of Mysteries. But Professor McGonagall believed differently. In her notes, kept during the Order's secret meetings, she wrote, "These lanterns are old magic, the kind that cannot be fully understood, only respected. They are part of Hogsmeade's conscience." A forgotten entry in Bathilda Bagshot's journals recounts the original installation of the lanterns. She described a witch named Elowyn Briar, a contemporary of Helga Hufflepuff, who believed light could be taught to feel. Elowyn travelled the Highlands collecting flame from will-o'-the-wisps, infusing each with emotion-detecting spells. She was eccentric and largely forgotten, but Hogsmeade's lanterns may be her enduring legacy. One of the most haunting stories came from Dennis Creevey in 1996. During a brief visit to Hogsmeade, he wandered off alone to photograph the village at night. Hours later, he returned pale and shaken. He claimed a lantern had followed him, that it moved slightly each time he turned, always keeping its flickering red glow trained on him. He hadn't done anything wrong, he insisted, but he had been thinking of revenge against a Slytherin who had cursed Colin. "It was like the lantern knew," he whispered. He never returned to the village alone again. On Halloween nights, the lanterns burned brighter than ever. Some said they flickered with joy, feeding off the energy of the students' excitement. Others believed they were agitated by the restless spirits drawn to the veil between worlds. On October 31st, 1994, when students returned from Hogsmeade late after celebrating in Honeydukes, they noticed a strange thing. Every lantern was bright yellow, a cheerful glow that had never been recorded before. Professor Lupin later suggested they were reacting to widespread happiness, but not even he could explain the colour. In the spring of 1998, when Hogsmeade stood in shadow during the lead-up to the Battle of Hogwarts, the lanterns went silent. They didn't flicker. They didn't glow. They simply burned with a steady, pale light. It was said the magic in them was holding its breath. When Aberforth Dumbledore led a group of fighters through the square on the night the battle began, the lanterns finally responded. Not with red, not with yellow, but with brilliant blue, a flash of hope in the darkness. Even decades later, Hogsmeade residents keep track of the lanterns. There's a running joke at the Hogshead Inn. You want to know who not to trust? Don't listen to your gut, watch the light. Tour guides point out the oldest lantern near the Shrieking Shack. It's said to have once burned so red it cracked its own glass when Tom Riddle passed beneath it as a boy. No one can confirm the story, but the glass was replaced in 1952, and it's the only lantern that has ever been reported to shatter without physical force. During a visit in 2009, Luna Lovegood wrote an article for The Quibbler titled "The Sentient Streetlights of Hogsmeade." In it, she described the lamps as the eyes of the village, always watching, always hoping. Her piece included drawings of lanterns with wings, roots, and even hearts. Though most dismissed it as eccentric nonsense, a footnote in the Ministry's Department of Magical Infrastructure later noted, "Ms. Lovegood's theory is not entirely without merit. Emotional feedback in magical light is a documented phenomenon. Despite all these stories, no one has ever discovered how to control the lanterns. Aurors have studied them. Cursebreakers have tried to replicate their behavior. Even the Department of Mysteries reportedly borrowed one for testing, only to return it, claiming it lost its magic once removed from Hogsmeade. Whatever the enchantment is, it's bound not just to the object, but to the place. Children born in Hogsmeade are warned early. Don't lie beneath the lights. Don't think cruel thoughts. Don't wish harm on others while standing in their glow. Not because the lights will punish, but because they will remember. The flicker might seem small, but it tells a story, and the villagers listen. Hogsmeade has no mayor, no government, but it has the lanterns, guardians without voice, without wand, without spellbook. They sway in the windless night, burning with memory. And in every heartbeat of their flame, there's a whisper. We see you. Number 21. Magical Bees and Hogsmeade. Honey. Hidden just beyond the gentle slope behind the village of Hogsmeade, where the frost clings longer and the flowers bloom in stranger colours, lies a nearly forgotten beekeeping haven, tended by two of the most peculiar figures ever to grace the faculty of Hogwarts. Their names, Professor Elidora Fenwick and Professor Thistlewick Crane, might stir vague memories in the minds of older witches and wizards, both having once taught herbology and alchemical theory respectively. After their quiet retirement from Hogwarts, they vanished from the usual wizarding circles, choosing instead a quieter life nestled in the folds of the Scottish Highlands, where they took up a hobby that became a magical marvel in its own right, the cultivation of wizard bees. These bees, not ordinary by any stretch, shimmered like drops of stained glass when they flew. Their wings flickered with an iridescence that made it impossible to look away, and as they passed overhead, they left behind trails of harmonic resonance, a musical buzzing not unlike enchanted chimes in the wind. The effect was subtle but deeply stirring. Many swore the sound soothed anxiety, soothed nightmares, and once even awakened a sleeping boy who had been cursed into a near coma by an improperly brewed draught of living death. The source of their magic lay not only in their wings or the music, but in the nectar they drew from enchanted blossoms cultivated by Elidora herself. Her flowers were bred from hybrids of asphodel and moondew, charmed to bloom only under starlight. The nectar, charged with the soft luminescence of the night sky, imbued the honey with properties no ordinary potion ingredient could match. Thistlewick had discovered that this honey, when used in a healing balm, accelerated skin regeneration tenfold, and when stirred into tea with powdered myrtlap essence, could calm magical inflammation of the nerves. Most famously, their honey was used in Madame Rosmerta's signature spiced mead served in the Three Broomsticks. Hogsmeade regulars would sip it on wintry afternoons, watching the fog roll down from the hills. A single drop of that golden elixir could warm the bones, and those in the know understood it was more than mere alcohol. It was brewed with something alive. "Best drink I ever had," said Horace Slughorn, in a rare moment of candour recorded in his private memoirs. And I do not say that lightly. Another regular client was Honeydukes. Ambrosius Flume, the sweet shop's master confectioner, discovered that crystallizing the honey into drops created a slow-dissolving candy that changed flavour depending on the eater's mood. He named them mood beads, and they became an underground hit among Hogwarts students, banned eventually by Filch for being too distracting. They have since become a collector's item among magical candy enthusiasts, but for all its delightful effects, the honey came with peculiar protections. The bees were fiercely intelligent and had inherited defensive spells embedded deep in their magical biology. If an outsider tried to enter the hive or steal even a single vial of honey, the bees would react, not with stings, but with magic. They would form up in mid-air into the shape of a shield, the unmistakable curve of the Protego charm, and unleash a burst of kinetic energy strong enough to knock a grown wizard flat. Their wings hummed a warning tune just before impact, a tremulous E minor chord that scholars believed was intentional. A recorded incident involved one Sylvester Poxley, a third-year Slytherin, who had heard from a sixth-year about the legendary honey. Tempted by visions of fame, Poxley sneaked out past curfew, intending to bring back a jar to impress his housemates. The moment his hand reached over the smallest of the hives, the bees erupted from their chambers in a shimmering storm. Witnesses later said the boy looked like he had been struck by lightning. For a full week afterward, his hair stood on end like a broom bristle. Professor Snape, in a rare moment of amusement, merely commented, "Let this be a lesson in consequences." The story spread like wildfire through Hogwarts. Students whispered about it in corridors and enchanted stairwells. Fred and George Weasley, always drawn to mischief, once tried to recreate the phenomenon using ordinary bees and jinxed string, but failed spectacularly. Hermione Granger later mentioned the magical bees in her annotated edition of Magical Creatures Beyond Classification, calling them an example of magically adapted defense ecology with sentient pattern recognition. The beekeepers themselves rarely spoke. Thistlewick Crane, tall and wiry with eyes like moss agate, preferred the company of his experimental cauldrons and complex honey infusions. Elladora Fenwick, small and stout with hair like winter wheat, spent her hours tending to the fields by moonlight, whispering spells to plants as if they were old friends. It was said she had once been a close confidant of Professor Sprout, and that it was Fenwick who had discovered the method of cross-pollination that allowed mandrakes to safely reproduce in captivity. But it wasn't just the honey that made their farm legendary. The entire beekeeping operation was protected by layers of enchantment, muggle-repelling charms, disillusionment fields, and even a temporal slow zone covered the area. The bees themselves seemed aware of the borders and rarely flew beyond the protective hill. Owls refused to deliver to the property, and even magical maps showed only a faint shimmer in the space it occupied. On rare occasions, the Order of the Phoenix had used the farm as a temporary meeting point. During the Second Wizarding War, Tonks once brought a wounded Remus Lupin to the Hidden Grove, where the bees, sensing distress, clustered above him in soothing patterns, releasing a calming melody that eased his transformation pains. Lupin later described the experience as like being cradled in song. Many years later, Luna Lovegood would write about the phenomenon in The Quibbler, positing that the bees were connected to the ancient musical magic of the Druids, drawing on the resonance of nature itself. "They are instruments," she wrote, "playing the song the earth has forgotten to hum." Her article was dismissed by most as dreamy nonsense, but Dumbledore reportedly kept a copy in his private library. What makes the story all the more fascinating is how few people know of its continued existence. After the Battle of Hogwarts, the village of Hogsmeade saw an influx of tourists and historians. Most came looking for war relics, looking to walk the same paths as heroes. Few ever noticed the slope behind the village or the strange shimmer in the air when standing just east of the old carriage track. The bees, of course, made no sound unless they wanted to be heard. When Minister Shacklebolt issued a decree encouraging the preservation of magical fauna and flora, the Hogsmeade apiary was granted special status as a sensitive magical ecosystem. It was placed under the joint protection of the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures and the Department of Mysteries. An unspeakable was reportedly stationed nearby, studying the tonal language of the bees, hoping to discover whether it was truly a language or merely an instinctual echo of old enchantments. Despite their fame, Elladora and Thistlewick refused any offers to commercialize the honey. Several business wizards, including a representative from the Nimbus Corporation, attempted to broker deals. One even brought a magically sealed contract that offered a 50,000 galleon advance. The bees, however, were the ones who rejected the offer, burning the parchment mid-air with a coordinated flash of hex light. The businessman fled, with his robes smouldering and his hat spinning like a top behind him. For those lucky enough to taste the honey directly from the source, an event that happens perhaps once a year, the experience is said to be transformative. Minerva McGonagall, in a letter to an old friend, wrote, "It was as if I tasted memory itself. Summer days as a child, the warmth of sunlight through classroom glass, the distant echo of bagpipes from the hills. It is more than honey, it is a spell of remembrance." One year, a jar of the honey was mistakenly auctioned at a ministry fundraiser. A buyer from Beauxbatons secured it for an astonishing sum of 12,000 galleons. When news reached Elladora, she sent a howler to the ministry, saying, "You've sold a miracle like a trinket. May the bees judge your soul." The jar was quietly returned, and still the legend grows. Children in Hogsmeade speak of the singing bees, and some swear they've seen them dancing under the moonlight, forming letters, runes, even names in the sky. A boy named Elias Crumb reportedly saw his own name spelled above his head in glowing golden bees when he wandered too close one night. He has since gone on to publish a book of poems titled The Apiary Heart. In the heart of Hogsmeade's living history, where so many places have been marked by war and wonder, the hill behind the village hums quietly with the sound of wings. It is a music only the chosen hear. And perhaps that's the true magic of it, not the honey nor the bees nor even the spells they carry in their tiny, buzzing bodies, but the invitation to listen. Number 22, Madame Rosmerta's Mysterious Black Cat. Every evening, as golden light spills through the frosted windows of the three broomsticks and laughter hums like music through the old wooden beams, the presence of a black cat with emerald eyes seems to go unnoticed by most. Yet those who pay attention, those who have returned to the inn time after time, will tell you a curious fact. Madame Rosmerta is never seen without that cat somewhere near, whether curled like a shadow under a bar stool or perched quietly on the windowsill. His eyes always watch, and his presence, subtle as a breath, never wanes. His name is never spoken, for none claim to know it. Rosmerta has never introduced him, nor does she scold or pet him like a common feline. It is almost as if they coexist in mutual agreement, bound by something older than mere companionship. His fur is glossy and darker than night, absorbing the lamplight, while his eyes gleam a supernatural green, brighter than a Slytherin gem. He never begs, never blinks, and, most curiously, he never leaves. Even during the most bustling weekends, when students from Hogwarts pour into the village for butterbeer and gossip, the cat remains a silent observer, unmoving, unblinking, eternal. Locals have whispered theories for years. Some say he is a magical guardian, gifted to Madame Rosmerta by Dumbledore himself during the dark days of the First Wizarding War. Others claim he is no cat at all, but a witch or wizard, a registered, or, more dangerously, an unregistered animagus, assigned to watch the three broomsticks, not just for the safety of its owner, but for the strategic value of Hogsmeade itself. There are, after all, few establishments in Britain more central to wizarding society, and fewer still as heavily trafficked by the young and the influential. The most persistent theory is perhaps the strangest. According to a parchment found tucked inside an old edition of the Practical Guide to Animagi, allegedly donated to the Hogwarts Library by Minerva McGonagall herself, a passage mentions a certain Felis viridis, a rare magical anomaly, a creature or animagus so deeply fused with feline magic that it begins to transcend typical animal behavior. While unproven, many suspect Rosmerta's cat is one such creature, evidenced by his startling ability to appear behind misbehaving patrons just as they're about to start a bar fight, or sneak into the back room where enchanted mead is stored. Fred and George Weasley once attempted such a feat during their 5th year at Hogwarts, hoping to borrow a cask of Rosmerta's private stock for a prank involving Hagrid's pumpkins. According to George, we'd only just cracked the cellar door when I felt a cold breath down my neck. Turned around, and there he was, those green eyes staring straight through me. I've never run so fast in my life. Fred claimed the cat didn't chase them, but instead simply watched them retreat, as if amused by their attempt. The twins later referred to him only as Rosmerta's Grim. Another peculiar incident occurred during the Second Wizarding War. On a snowy evening in February, a Death Eater in disguise entered the three broomsticks. He'd taken the Polyjuice potion and appeared as an old man from the Ministry of Magic, hoping to coax information about the whereabouts of certain Order members. Rosmerta, always cordial but careful, served him a drink. Before he could finish it, the cat leapt onto his table, silently, without knocking over a single glass, and stared into his eyes. The man collapsed moments later, convulsing, before being quietly carried away by auras summoned by a silent Patronus that had emerged from Rosmerta's wand. It was later discovered he had used a tampered wand core, and the magical backlash triggered by the cat's sudden intrusion caused a temporary but violent seizure. Some believe it was mere coincidence, Others, particularly a few retired members of the Order, are convinced the cat saw through the disguise and acted deliberately. Most eerie, perhaps, is the cat's rumoured connection to the equinoxes. According to Batilda Bagshot's lesser-known notes, tucked away in a footnote to A History of Magic, certain enchanted animals behave differently during days of cosmic balance, namely the spring and autumn equinoxes. One young witch, Orla Quirk, swore she heard the cat whisper her name on the night of the autumn equinox, shortly after she'd tried to pocket a silver spoon from Rosmerta's bar. She screamed, dropped the spoon, and ran out into the street. Years later, she refused to enter the pub again, telling her friends, "It spoke. It told me I had been weighed and found wanting." If true, it wouldn't be the first time magic has infused a creature with voice. The Sorting Hat speaks, and many enchanted portraits converse freely. Yet what makes this cat different is that his voice, if real, appears only at precise moments, balance between day and night, light and dark. Observers claim his eyes shine more brightly during these times, and that his shadow grows long and moves slightly out of sync with his body, as though part of him belongs to another plane altogether. There is also the matter of the cat's absence, more specifically, the lack of it. In over 30 years, no one has ever seen the cat leave the Three Broomsticks, not once. Not for food, not for air, not for a stroll through Hogsmeade's crooked lanes. Even during the harshest winters, when snow buries shopfronts and blizzards roar from the forbidden forest, the cat is present, perched on the bar or watching from the rafters. Some guests have tested this, hiding near the door after closing time or casting disillusionment charms and spying from the alley. Yet the result is always the same. The cat remains. Always. There was a time, however, when Madame Rosmerta vanished. It was during the spring of 1982 when Voldemort had fallen, but the Ministry remained shaken and uncertain. For 3 weeks the Three Broomsticks remained locked, shutters drawn, no light from within. Yet the cat was seen every evening sitting by the threshold, unmoving as a statue. Visitors described an aura of protection that surrounded the building, one even saying that her wand began to hum when she approached. When Rosmerta finally returned, looking pale but unharmed, the cat simply walked back inside without a glance. No explanation was given, no questions were asked. There are theories that connect the cat to the ancient magics embedded in Hogsmeade itself. Unlike Diagon Alley, which sprang up around commerce, Hogsmeade's roots are steeped in protection, secrecy, and rebellion. Some believe the cat is a physical embodiment of the village's guardian spirit, given form and fur. A relic from the days of Hengist of Woodcroft, Hogsmeade's founder, who may have sealed a protective enchantment into the soil of the village, awakened only when great need arises. If that's true, then the cat may not serve Rosmerta alone, but the village itself. Certain shopkeepers like Madame Puddifoot and Mr. Filbert of the Honeydukes' cellar staff have admitted to seeing the cat appear in their own establishments, especially during times of minor danger, like a rogue fanged flyer escaping its cage or a batch of suspiciously explosive exploding bonbons. Filbert once told a young Hogwarts journalist that the cat's arrival is as regular as guilt. You don't see him unless you've done something wrong. In that way, the cat functions almost like a moral compass, an unspoken deterrent for wickedness. There was once an attempt by the Daily Prophet to uncover the truth. A reporter named Jasper Thimble posed as a guest and spent a fortnight drinking at the bar, sketching the cat, writing copious notes. On his last night, he sent an owl back to his editor, claiming he'd discovered something buried under the floorboards of the west wall. His body was found the next morning in Nocturne Alley, wand missing, memory scrambled. He could no longer recall his own name, let alone anything about the cat. Rosmerta closed the inn for 3 days in silent mourning. The west wall remains undisturbed. Perhaps the most haunting moment in recent memory came during the Battle of Hogwarts. As students and teachers clashed with Death Eaters on the castle grounds, a lesser-known duel took place in Hogsmeade. a group of masked figures attempted to seize control of the village, setting fire to buildings and cursing any who opposed them. The 3 broomsticks, however, remained untouched. Witnesses say the cat walked into the street, slowly, calmly, and simply stared. Every curse aimed at him rebounded, every attacker fled. When the dust settled, only scorch marks remained, and the cat returned to his perch behind the bar. He has been part of Hogsmeade's lore ever since. New students to Hogwarts are often told the tale over butterbeer, that if you lie, steal, or cause trouble in the village, Rosmerta's cat will know, and he will find you. Teachers do not discourage the myth, some even expand on it. Professor Sprout once told a particularly rowdy group of 4th years that Hogsmeade's guardian does not sleep and he does not forgive. Even Peeves avoids the cat. During his rare ventures into the village, the poltergeist has been seen reversing direction when the cat is near, muttering, "Green-eyed glare! No fun there!" If even Peeves gives him wide berth, perhaps there's more truth in the legend than most would admit. Magic, after all, often cloaks itself in jest to keep the wise from seeing what's right before their eyes. One winter, when the snow piled high and the students were kept from visiting Hogsmeade, a curious event occurred. A group of Slytherins, bored and irritable, decided to test the legend. They sent a charmed parchment, an insult addressed to the cat, floating through the cold air, past the gates, and into the open chimney of the 3 broomsticks. According to Filch, who found them weeping near the Great Hall the next morning, they all woke up with claw marks on their hands and a voice in their ears that whispered their full names in slow, hissing tones. The scars faded, the memory did not. There are many things Hogwarts cannot explain, and even more that Hogsmeade hides in plain sight. Madame Rosmerta smiles and pours drinks, her eyes twinkling like firelight, but she never speaks of the cat. He remains unnamed, unchallenged, eternal. Not a pet, not a familiar, and perhaps not even a being at all. Simply a guardian in fur, watching, waiting, and always, always present. Would you sit comfortably with such a creature behind you, reader? Would you dare to test his silence, or would you, like the wise, pay your tab with clean hands and clear conscience, never turning your back on the black shape in the shadows, whose emerald eyes never close? Number 23. The Magical Weather Station. In the quiet village of Hogsmeade, where the snow settles like powdered sugar on rooftops and the windows flicker with warm candlelight, there exists a building that most passers-by overlook. Tucked behind the discreet and ink-scented shop of Madame Scrivel's quills, hidden by enchantments that obscure its presence from casual glances, stands an ancient structure of weathered stone and shimmering slate. Few know of its true purpose, fewer still know its name. But for those attuned to the peculiarities of the magical world, this edifice is known simply as the Hogsmeade Meteorological Enclave, a weather station, but not just any kind. The structure dates back to the late 18th century, erected by an eccentric wizard named Erasmus Fogwill, a former Ravenclaw who believed that understanding the sky could unlock not just the secrets of the weather, but of fate itself. Fogwill enchanted the building with a constellation of spells that fused meteorology with divination, blending barometric pressure charms with rune-based prognostication. As a result, the Hogsmeade station never relied on mundane instruments. Its ceiling, similar in magic to the enchanted one in the Great Hall of Hogwarts, displayed swirling forecasts in the form of illusions. Purple clouds meant jellybean showers, and gold lightning signaled windstorms that whispered ghostly names. Though the station is not open to the public, its effects ripple throughout the region. On several occasions, Hogwarts staff have quietly admitted that the station has saved numerous school events from turning into magical disasters. Professor McGonagall, known for her meticulous planning, often consulted the station when scheduling Quidditch matches. "She never liked surprises," remarked a former Gryffindor student from the class of 1992, and everyone knew she had her ways of knowing when the skies would be merciful. The forecasts are written in a long scroll that updates itself every sunrise, and the scroll is enchanted to unroll and float in mid-air for authorized personnel. The parchment hisses softly as it adjusts, giving off a smell of damp moss and electric fog. The predictions are oddly poetic, often reading like riddles. By moon's third wink, the candies shall fall. Or, when the crows turn west, prepare your coats, snowmen will walk. It is said that during the winter of 1887, a blizzard of such ferocity had been predicted by the station 3 days in advance, allowing Hogwarts to enchant the castle with warming charms and cancel classes just before the avalanche blocked the main road to Hogsmeade. On the morning of February 14, 1962, the station forecasted an unusual weather pattern. Storm of whispers, due at dusk. That evening, a mysterious wind swept through the castle grounds, and students reported hearing faint voices in the air, murmurs that sounded like ancient spells spoken in forgotten tongues. Professor Dumbledore himself mentioned the event in a staff meeting, referring to it as a gentle reminder that nature and magic are not separate, but in constant dialogue. The station's most beloved prediction happened during the Yule season of 1974, when a snowfall came not with flakes, but with soft, round figures that gently fell from the sky, snowmen with blinking eyes and carrot noses that moved, waved, and even sang. For 12 hours, these sentient sculptures wandered the village and castle grounds, offering warm hugs and caroling in 8 different languages. Head boy Lucian Bowl was seen leading a snowman parade through the Great Hall, an event now commemorated in one of the tapestries near the Charms corridor. But the station is not without temperament. Generations of witches and wizards assigned to maintain its enchantments have noted that the station seems to prefer gratitude. When its predictions are ignored or taken for granted, odd consequences follow. In 1995, during the final week of December, the station's scroll clearly warned, "Sleet of spice at midnight, beware the tickle." Dismissing it as poetic nonsense, the staff proceeded with the traditional winter ball. At exactly midnight, a cascade of pink sleet rained over the entire Great Hall, carrying with it a cinnamon scent so strong it caused everyone to sneeze uncontrollably. Fred Weasley later joked it was the first time the weather crashed the party harder than we did. According to archive notes found in the restricted section, the original spellwork used by Erasmus Fogwill included a charm called Climafactum Revelar, which bound elemental spirits to the physical structure of the station. These spirits, invisible and ancient, are believed to be responsible for the more whimsical phenomena, like the autumn gusts that scatter leaves into precise patterns of ancient runes, or the fog that sometimes forms the silhouettes of dancing creatures. On the 3rd of October each year, a spectral deer has been seen galloping over the roofs of Hogsmeade, leaving trails of frost in its wake. Students whisper that it's a guardian of the station, though no teacher has confirmed this. It is no coincidence that Madame Scrivel's shop shares a wall with the station. Her quills are said to absorb ambient magic from the station's enchantments, resulting in ink that subtly shimmers under moonlight. For this reason, many professors insist on using only Scrivel's quills for their most critical correspondence. Professor Flitwick once remarked, during a lecture on charms, "Some parchment speaks, but a Scrivel quill sings, especially during a north wind." The Ministry of Magic has attempted on several occasions to regulate or even seize the Hogsmeade station, citing safety concerns over its less predictable outbursts. However, the townspeople, led by Mayor Dorothy Featherkin in the 1930s, successfully lobbied to have the station protected under the ancient Magical Heritage Act. The station is now considered a Class II magical monument, which forbids relocation or substantial interference. Even Dolores Umbridge, during her brief and infamous regime, avoided tangling with the station, perhaps due to the rumor that it caused her hair to frizz uncontrollably for a week after she dismissed one of its forecasts. Perhaps the most intriguing document related to the station is a letter from Professor McGonagall to then-headmaster Armando Dippet, dated 1946. In it she writes, "The clouds above the pitch shimmer oddly, and I suspect the station is offering us one of its rare warnings. I shall delay the match, better to earn student scorn than to tempt the wrath of skybound magic." The letter, preserved in the Hogwarts archives, is now a key example studied in magical weather ethics courses. What makes the station uniquely magical is not merely its predictive ability, but its interaction with emotions and memory. On several rare occasions, it has rained objects of sentimental value, buttons from lost robes, broken wand cores, even teardrops that solidify into glass. One such rain occurred in 1983, shortly after the death of a beloved herbology professor. Witnesses claim the sky wept petals that dissolved into perfume when touched. Even ghosts reportedly paused to observe the phenomenon. The building itself is a marvel of magical architecture. It expands and contracts with the seasons, gaining an extra window in spring and shedding ivy-like hair in summer. At its heart lies a central orb called the Aeolar core, a pulsating sphere of light that hums in resonance with the weather outside. Charm specialists believe the orb is semi-sentient and might be linked to pre-Celtic enchantments, possibly druidic in origin. Its presence is what allows the building to remain hidden from muggles despite the occasional magical storm breaking loose. Every 5 years, a Keeper of the Sky is appointed to recalibrate the enchantments. The role is ceremonial but significant. The current keeper, Alrake Binns, not to be confused with the ghostly history professor, has held the post since 2007. He is rarely seen, save for glimpses of his emerald cloak near the thistle bushes behind the station. It is said he communes with the station in silence, offering thanks and guidance in exchange for continued service. The weather predictions, while primarily local, have sometimes echoed further afield. During the Triwizard Tournament in 1994, a sudden firestorm was averted thanks to a last-minute update from the station warning of embered gales with mirrored teeth. The warning prompted immediate enchantments placed around the arena, which many believe spared the champions from unintended disaster. Ludo Bagman later referred to the incident in a private memo, noting, "Odd little station in Hogsmeade may be the only thing standing between our events and nature's fury." Hogsmeade villagers treat the station with respect, leaving offerings near the base, coins, miniature broomsticks, and tiny bottles of butterbeer. On the winter solstice, children gather near its concealed door and sing carols, believing their voices help clear the skies. One year, a child's wish was answered so directly, a sudden beam of sunlight breaking through clouds on the coldest day, that the mayor issued an official declaration, "Hogsmeade thanks the sky." Despite its importance, few outside Hogwarts and Hogsmeade know of the station's existence. The Daily Prophet has only ever mentioned it twice, both times in footnotes. When asked, former reporter Rita Skeeter admitted, "Every time I tried to photograph it, my camera exploded into glitter." Skeeter never returned to Hogsmeade after that. Even among Hogwarts students, the station remains something between a myth and a whisper. Yet every time a candy-laced rain falls, or a snowman hums a lullaby, or the wind sighs like a ghostly librarian, the older students glance toward Madame Scrivell's shop and smile knowingly. The village may be small, the weather capricious, but the skies above Hogsmeade are watched by ancient magic, not controlled, only understood, and only by those wise enough to say thank you. Number 24. The letter found in the bench. The bench sat quietly in the centre of Hogsmeade, carved from blackened oak that had weathered snow, sleet, and generations of student chatter. It was placed beneath a lantern post whose glass panes had long since fogged over with age. Most students passed it by, drawn instead to the 3 Broomsticks or Honeydukes. But one late autumn evening, under a sharp October sky, a Ravenclaw 5th year named Emery Wellwood decided to sit and sketch the crooked skyline of the village. He had always preferred the quiet edges of places, the spaces where forgotten stories slept beneath frost and moss. That's when he heard it. A faint rustle beneath him, too steady to be the wind. Sliding his hand under the wooden slats, Emery's fingers brushed parchment. A crumbling envelope, sealed with wax that had cracked and split with time, emerged from the shadows. The name on the front was written in neat, looping ink. To Miss Janie Underbridge, on the 3rd night of the full moon. The date on the corner, 17th of October, 1893. The ink shimmered faintly, and the moment the moon crested the distant mountains, the seal dissolved in a whisper of gold sparks. The letter was no ordinary confession. It had been written by a Slytherin student named Cassian Blythe, a name Emery later verified in the Hogwarts registry with the help of Professor Vector. Cassian's words bloomed across the parchment only under the moonlight, a spellbinding effect that made the letter unreadable at any other time. It began with a line both vulnerable and bold. "If you read this, Janie, it means you've found the truth I was too afraid to speak under the sun." Janie Underbridge, as Emery discovered through old copies of the Hogwarts Whisperer, had been a Hufflepuff known for her affinity for magical flora and for founding the first student-run greenhouse behind the Hogsmeade station. She vanished from the school rolls mysteriously at the end of her 6th year. No expulsion, no tragedy, just quiet absence. The timing matched the letter precisely. Cassian's confession revealed not only romantic affection, but a connection to a secret game that once ran among the students of the 4 houses. According to the letter, the game of Echoes was a magical challenge devised in secrecy by upper-year students during the 1890s. Participants were to enchant personal messages, love letters, fears, truths, and hide them across the village. Only those who deciphered the riddles and abided by arcane rules like lunar cycles or precise emotional states could access them. Emery brought the letter to Professor Flitwick, whose eyes sparkled with recognition. He recalled reading a brief mention of the echoes in the footnotes of Hogwarts. A history, though the practice had been deemed too emotionally manipulative and quietly discouraged by Headmaster Everard in 1895. The notion that magic could be tied to honesty, longing, and silence intrigued the charms professor. "It's a kind of magic we rarely teach," he mused, "because it forces the caster to trust time more than wand work." Cassian's letter mentioned several landmarks around Hogsmeade. The stone basin behind Madame Puddifoot's, a cracked window on the upper floor of Dervish and Bangis, and a trail of enchanted acorns leading toward the Shrieking Shack. Each was a station in his game, clues meant for Janie alone. He wrote, "If your heart still beats for questions, find what I left where the frost blooms first." Emery, now fully drawn into this century-old romance and mystery, retraced Cassian's steps with a parchment map enchanted to glow where traces of his spellwork remained. Under the full moon, the basin behind Madame Puddifoot's revealed a second letter, one burned into the stone in silver script. This one was more cryptic, speaking of a pact, a promise to never let secrets rot beneath snow. It hinted that Janie had replied, perhaps not in ink, but with spells of her own. Indeed, just above the carved words, a single daisy bloomed through a crack in the stone, untouched by frost. The tale deepened when Emery consulted the restricted section and found a nearly forgotten volume titled Ephemeral Enchantments, Temporary Magics of Emotional Intent. There, in tight cursive, on page 347, lay a spell attributed to a Ju, designed to preserve memory in objects touched during a moment of deep feeling. It was likely that Janie had not only found Cassian's letters, but had answered with one of her own, one that remained unfound. The mystery turned a corner when Emery visited Zonko's joke shop, where a portrait of an old wizard named Tobias Rakeby hung above the staircase. Tobias had been a student in the late 1890s and, when asked, murmured through his frame, "There was a girl who spoke with owls and a boy who feared the sorting hat would find too much light in him. I believe he left her a promise carved into ice." This led Emery to the Hogsmeade well, frozen every winter but flowing just beneath the surface. In February, when the air was sharp and the moon full, Emery leaned over the well's lip and whispered Janie's name. The ice cracked in a spiral, and beneath the surface glowed the words, "In frost I speak what fire cannot." There was no signature, but the handwriting matched Cassian's. Cassian's final letter, found inside a hollow broom handle lodged in the rafters of the Shrieking Shack, bore the heaviest truth. He had planned to leave Hogwarts to join the Department of Mysteries, but feared what his housemates would say about his affection for a Hufflepuff. "Love is brave," he wrote, "but I was not." He told her that he had hidden every piece of himself across Hogsmeade, hoping she would forgive him not with words, but by following the path he left. Janey, as it turned out, never returned for her final year. In the same records that held Cassian's final grades, her file had only one line written in blue ink: withdrawn, no cause reported. Flitwick, now fully invested, suggested that her departure might have been a silent act of love, an answer in kind to Cassian's puzzle. If she couldn't bear to play the game he created, she might have chosen to leave it unfinished, like a ghost story without a final scream. Yet something more emerged. In the spring, Emery walked past the bench where it all began and noticed a new carving, a small heart, split down the middle by a lightning bolt, Cassian's personal sigil, which he had doodled in the corners of his letters. But this carving was fresh, no more than a few weeks old. No student confessed to making it, and no staff remembered seeing it before. Professor Sinistra offered an eerie theory that the game of echoes had never truly ended, that perhaps the enchantments Cassian and Janey laid had matured with time, becoming part of Hogsmeade's magical fabric. "This village remembers," she said, "and sometimes it speaks." On Emery's last trip to the Shrieking Shack that term, he left behind a letter of his own. Not a confession, but a record, a promise to continue the search. The magic Cassian used was rare and deeply personal, weaving intent with memory. It wasn't just charms, it was longing manifested. It was a kind of ancient honesty, more powerful than most students dared to learn. The story spread quietly through Hogwarts. Students began visiting the landmarks, leaving behind their own trinkets, charms, poems, initials. It wasn't organized, and no teacher ever acknowledged it, but everyone felt it. Hogsmeade had become more than a weekend escape. It had become a breathing archive of feeling. And under every full moon, someone somewhere would find something waiting. Hermione once said in The Half-Blood Prince, "I think I'd prefer books to people." But if she had read Cassian's letters, she might have reconsidered. For here were books written in frost, memory, and moonlight, open only to those who dared to believe that silence could speak. In time, the Magical Theory Department at Hogwarts began cataloguing the echoes, treating them as artifacts of emotive enchantment. One report noted that the effects of these letters linger long after their original spellwork dissolves, suggesting that emotional magic is reinforced by human discovery. It became the subject of several new T-level theses. Yet none of the academic papers captured what Emery felt when he read the final line of the final letter, written in ink that vanished as soon as it was read. "If we are found, it will not be by force or fire, but by kindness and by the courage to sit still long enough to listen." And so the bench remains, unmarked, on any map, but remembered by anyone who ever sat on it during a full moon and thought perhaps that the wind was trying to speak. Number 25, The Night Watchman. Nobody hired, there is a story whispered through the frosty winds of Hogsmeade, a tale known only to those who stay awake when the rest of the village sleeps. At precisely 3 in the morning, when even the fireplaces in the 3 Broomsticks are reduced to dim embers, and Madame Rosmerta has retired behind locked doors, a figure appears on the cobblestone road between Gladrag's Wizardware and the post office. He is draped in a weather-worn cloak, the hood always up, and from his right hand dangles a lantern casting an otherworldly blue glow that pulses like a heartbeat. Hogsmeade residents call him the Night Watchman. No one hired him, no one remembers when he first appeared, and yet he has become as much a part of the village as Honeydukes' sugary scent or the whooshing sound of brooms landing outside the Hog's Head. He doesn't speak, doesn't acknowledge greetings, and should anyone dare to step too close, he fades into mist like breath on glass. But what's most curious is the calm that has followed his presence. Since the first sighting, recorded in a half-burned issue of the Daily Prophet tucked beneath a floorboard in Aberforth Dumbledore's Inn, not a single act of dark magic has been reported in the village after sundown. Mrs. Agnes Binns, an elderly widow who lives above the Scrivenshaft's quill shop, swears she first saw the figure the same night. She was nearly attacked by what she thought was a rogue werewolf near the Shrieking Shack. "I had just finished knitting socks for my grandson," she told a reporter once, "when I saw the creature loping up the path. But then this blue light, like moonlight in a bottle." The thing ran off without a sound. She never saw the creature again, and more importantly, no one else has either. That path has remained eerily quiet since. Students at Hogwarts speak of him in hushed tones, especially during the winter months when the snow muffles footsteps and the streets echo with strange, dreamlike noises. "There's something out there," a Hufflepuff third year once wrote in a letter to her cousin in Muggle London, "and it's not part of any class or club. Professor Flitwick said to stay indoors after dark, but I swear I saw a lantern glowing from the tower window." Interestingly, the headmistress at the time, Professor McGonagall, received anonymous letters claiming the watchman had been seen warding off an attempted break-in at Zonko's joke shop. The windows had been cracked, not shattered, suggesting someone was trying to enter silently. The proprietors found boot prints in the snow leading to the door, then stopping completely in the middle of the street. No footprints left. Only a faint trace of ash and a patch of stone still warm to the touch in the freezing dawn. Aberforth Dumbledore, when asked directly, narrowed his eyes and muttered, "Some ghosts wear armor, others just wear time, that one wears both." No one has ever gotten him to elaborate. Yet Aberforth did hang a peculiar brass charm above the door of the Hogshead the week after the first appearance, a symbol of old warding magic, often used during the First Wizarding War. Visitors report that it hums when the lantern pulse draws near. Curiously, the Department of Magical Law Enforcement has no record of a night shift patroller assigned to Hogsmeade. When Aura Daphne Podmore investigated the matter, prompted by curious students and cautious villagers, she was met with dead ends. No magical creature registered with the Ministry matched the watchman's description. He left no trace behind, no magical residue, no lingering signature. But Daphne did recover one detail: a list of unofficial village defences from the 1940s written in Dumbledore's own hand, which included a single, scribbled line at the bottom. For emergencies, lantern ward on perimeter loop, keyed to Protectorus. The word Protectorus has never been defined in any known spellbook, but linguistic historians at the Department of Mysteries believe it may have been a prototype charm, a hybrid of Patronus and Protego, designed to create a semi-sentient guardian of place rather than person. If true, it would be one of Dumbledore's earliest experimental spells and potentially his most misunderstood. In The Half-Blood Prince, Harry notes that Dumbledore once said, "Sometimes we must choose between what is easy and what is right." Was it possible that during the escalating tensions of Grindelwald's rise, the great wizard chose to leave behind more than wisdom and wands? The fact that the watchman bears no wand, speaks no incantations, and emits a light that repels danger without direct confrontation hints at a spell cast not for war, but for peace. The Shrieking Shack, long believed to be haunted, became unusually silent after the watchman's arrival. Before, villagers often reported sounds, moaning, breaking furniture, and unnatural howls. But now, not even an owl nests near the decaying wood. Magical creature experts argue that the watchman's light may suppress dark enchantments in the surrounding area, possibly neutralizing cursed architecture. Professor Grubblyplank once theorized that if the watchman is magical in origin, he might have become attuned to ley lines beneath the village, drawing his power from the very bones of the land. And yet some believe the watchman is no construct, but a soul, bound and purposeful. Old Head Boy records mention a young man named Elric Morwen, who vanished defending the Hogsmeade rail station during a Death Eater raid in 1981. He was last seen holding a blue glowing lantern, rallying young villagers to safety. His body was never found. The station clock still stops at 3:02 a.m. on the anniversary of his disappearance, ticking back to life when dawn comes. There is also the case of Celestina Warbeck's impromptu midnight concert in Hogsmeade in 1994. She had arrived for a surprise show at the Three Broomsticks, While her manager tried to keep the area clear of trouble, several members of the crowd later claimed to have seen the watchman lingering at the edge of the gathering. Not a single incident of theft or magical mischief occurred that night, despite a crowd of over 400 witches and wizards. "I felt watched," one fan wrote, "but not in a bad way. It was like someone was keeping us safe." When the Second Wizarding War broke out, Hogsmeade was largely spared from the nightly chaos that struck other magical communities. Some credit the village's remote location, others point to its proximity to Hogwarts. But among villagers, the truth is older, colder, and glows blue. They believe the watchman is why the Death Eaters stayed away. As one war veteran said in an unmarked interview for the Quibbler, they hated things they couldn't understand. And that one? That one wasn't bound by the rules of duels or unforgivables. Magical cartographer Winton Frax mapped ambient enchantments in the Hogsmeade region and found an unusual energy ring around the village perimeter. A pulse, always moving, never fading, consistent with the size and pace of a human patrol. When charted against known watchman sightings, the shape formed a continuous looping figure eight. It never crossed the grounds of Hogwarts nor touched the Forbidden Forest. It was a protective orbit, an eternal march. In rare cases, travellers to Hogsmeade have reported seeing a second light, smaller, greener, always at a distance from the watchman. Aura Kingsley Shacklebolt speculated this could be an echo of a failed spell, perhaps a remnant of someone or something that tried to interfere with the watchman's domain. "Some spells leave shadows," he once remarked, "especially the ones that try to fight protection." There is also the curious account of Fendrel Twisp, a Slytherin dropout turned vagabond who attempted to rob the outpost in 2007. He was found unconscious near the edge of the village, his belongings intact, pockets empty, eyes wide open and unblinking. St. Mungo's diagnosed him with arcane disorientation, a rare magical condition triggered by sudden exposure to unfiltered ancient magic. Twisp never spoke again, though he did, in his one known attempt at communication, draw a blue flame on the wall of his room. The image faded within hours. Some shopkeepers leave tea or pumpkin pasties near their doors before closing, a quiet offering to the unseen guardian. Most mornings the items remain untouched, but in one recorded instance, a note was left behind beside a half-eaten biscuit. It read, in delicate, spidery script, "The night holds many secrets, but none shall pass." Even Peeves, the incorrigible poltergeist of Hogwarts, has been seen avoiding Hogsmeade after sunset. In Order of the Phoenix, Fred and George Weasley noted, "Even Peeves wouldn't follow us that far, said something about too much light for a proper haunting." The fact that a ghost, known for mischief, fears the lantern's glow is telling. Today the watchman remains an enigma, unclaimed, unnamed, and unbothered by attempts to study or summon him. Diviners have tried, unspeakables have hypothesized, and ghosts have hinted at truths they refuse to reveal. But the people of Hogsmeade, those who wake to find snow undisturbed and silence unbroken, no longer ask who he is. They simply nod to the flickering blue light if they see it in the distance and whisper, "All's well." Some magic does not seek attention, it does not demand gratitude, it only wishes to endure. And perhaps that is the watchman's true purpose, not to be seen, not to be known, but to keep the darkness a few steps behind the light.